You're listening to Rainbow Rock and WAYO LP Rochester. All right, everybody, we have a special guest on with us. We've got Jimmy Benbow, whose birthday was yesterday. He is here. We haven't had him on in a while. Hey, Jimmy, how are you doing?
I'm doing better and hoping things get better when I continue all my physical and occupational therapy at this beautiful hospital up here, Monroe Community Hospital.
Awesome. I'm sorry that you had to be even up there. You've been out of commission for a couple of months, correct?
It's been an ordeal. It's been a serious ordeal, but for the most part, slow and as it goes, being vigilant and diligent, I think I'll be able to work myself back into creating a little bit stronger body parts so I can get some repair done. And
right.
I'm looking for my time to be like Steve Austin.
There you go. That's great. Happy birthday.
Thank you, sis.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to
Happy
you.
birthday.
But so Jimmy, there's been so much that's gone on in the world since we last talked on radio. We had what was going on with Black Lives Matter. The Out Alliance keeps doing its own insanity, and the world is. And by the way, just so you know, Jim, we're going to give you breaking news right now that we've just shot down our fourth UFO tonight over Lake Huron.
We're shooting.
Well, as long as it falls in the water and doesn't fall on anybody's house,
right?
Or doesn't fall on that. I mean, what is this? The sky is going to fall. What is that? Chicken Little?
Chicken Little.
Yeah,
The sky is going to fall. Or what the hell, man?
But
I was thinking X-Files.
But there is.
Oh, X-Files. Is that Brian? X-Files?
I am right here, actually. Hi, Jenny. How you doing?
Hey, buddy. I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you're at Monroe Community Hospital because they do have a really good therapy program there. So I'm glad that you are there. I toured it a couple of years ago, and they really got a really neat place there. So you'll be up and going in no time, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so. But the thing about this place, it is really a very beautiful. Mm-hmm. It's a gorgeous place, and I've gotten lost a couple times because I've gotten enthralled and gazed with looking at all the creative or the artwork and stuff that when you go through the hospital and the variety of areas. And this place is beautiful, man. I mean, wow.
That's nice.
And the staff I work with, the staff is excellent. I work with a great team of people that are getting me to pushing me, and I'm pushing myself. Not today. I'm hanging out with my friend Lo, and her and I are sitting up in here waiting for the Super Bowl, and she's trying to get a Grubhub order. And yes.
Nice.
I think she's finally got it, but otherwise, it's been an experience. So I'm glad I'm able to. Kristen, Michael got me on, and I can say hey to some folks and chime in on some things.
So, who are you rooting for the Super Bowl?
Rihanna.
First time in 7 years.
Good choice.
Yeah.
I want to see what she's going to be wearing, and I hope she's all nice and chunky and curvy when she's coming out there dancing. And so I can listen to all these Christians really yell at Jesus. There's too much flesh flying around up there on that stage. There's too much pumping and jerking going on. Yes, it is, America. Because I really don't care for the halftime shows. I wish they had the college, high school bands marching and playing, because I think it would be great for the parents to see their kids, but it's such a money-making machine now.
It is.
I would love to see the colleges come out and march. I mean, because there's some great college bands, marching bands.
Imagine how good they'd feel out there.
Oh, my God. Give the kids a chance.
Hey, Jimmy, when did they actually start doing these big acts for the Super Bowl? Do you remember?
I think it had to be in the early 2000s or maybe the 90s. When MTV and Pepsi made this deal, and we started getting all these acts. I forgot. I remember some of them that have been. I mean, it blows me away. You had British acts. You had the Who. Why are the Who doing an American act, performing doing an American sport? Not saying I'm being a pompous and snobby American, but I love the Who. But why are the Who doing it? You know, I mean, some other acts. I mean, the best performance, or the one that everybody loves the most, was Prince doing his when it was raining. But as far as I think it dates back maybe a good 20 years, Michael, but I'm not too sure.
Cool.
Yeah. I just did a quick little Google search, and it said when did the Super Bowl halftime show become a big deal? In 1993, the year that Michael Jackson turned the Super Bowl halftime into a much-watched television. So very good.
That's right. Him and Pepsi, right? Was he with Pepsi
Coca-Cola,
at
I
that
think.
So, Jimmy,
If it was Pepsi.
to go from the football world and things that are fun, so much of what's gone on. Obviously, February is Black History Month, and so much that's been going on in Florida with Ron DeSantis trying to. He said, what do black kids need to know about queer theory? And I was just thinking about the homophobia that's kind of here we work for years to try to encourage a discussion about all communities in every culture, that they're gay black folks, they're straight white folks, they're bisexual, they're transgender black folks, they're white folks, and how do you think?
Did you hear the black group apologize to him?
What?
They made an apology. And apologized and said they were wrong because for whatever the connecting of Black history in the LGBT community is so shunned, or I don't know what the curriculum would consist of because we don't know anything what's going on in Florida. But this group, I guess, they read the boogeyman has been this. Well, they're connecting the LGBT community with the Black community and Black history. And these folks are flipping out because I guess they think they're being conditioned or are indoctrinated with being happy, being yourself.
Right.
And understanding yourself as Black, but, not dealing with the realities of how much has been, how much, I can't believe I'm forgetting the word, but how much the queer community has a connection. I mean, granted, there's always been that big argument back in the days because Black people are saying, well, geez, we're still trying to get this right. And then all of a sudden, gay folks are being thrown into the mix with us, and we're still not getting the rights. But this thing is, it's a human rights issue.
Right.
It's a human rights issue. That's what it is, basically. And the human rights of every human that contributed, that's the word, that contributed to our history,
right?
That's being wiped out or being, they're scaring people or they're ignoring because we know, and they do know, there's records of transgender men in the 1800s,
right.
Or definitely in the early 1900s.
Right.
I mean, as far as I might not know, but I remember reading some articles of a few individuals. And I wish I had wrote down at that time and it blew me away, but I wish I had wrote down those notes and took note of that to have these arguments. There's a few of them I wish I had wrote down to have these arguments because so much is still being shunned and the fear, the white fear. I mean, when we talk about what the log cabin Republicans were, that's actually being ignored. But it comes about when people are talking about Abe Lincoln and Abe Lincoln's friends,
right? And
a couple of his friends. Granted, it's not as extensive as well as how extensive could it be within the community of color. I mean, in the community of color, everybody was dealing with heinous and dealing with more of the savagery of the Jim Crow situation after slavery. And so you didn't get a chance to really see what was happening. And definitely the Black churches that were going on at that period of time, there was never any talk about the issue of the LGBT community and LGBT people being a part of it during that period of time. But we do know within the speakeasies back in the early 1900s,
Right.
there were a lot of madams that were she's. There were a lot of madams that were she's back in those days. So I don't know. My thing is, I definitely laugh when we talk about Black History Month and we only get 28 days. And
well, we wouldn't want to make it too long.
You could be exhausted here. With all
and you
your
get the
appearances.
coldest month of the year, too, right? I mean, let's give you the shortest and coldest.
So it's so good to see all the, I mean, there's the arguments where, like, people, Morgan Freeman and a few other actors, they would say, well, we shouldn't be having this at all. And I agree with them to a point, but we shouldn't have had HBCU colleges either. But they had to happen.
Right.
They had to happen. People are being squeezed out. And they don't talk about the HBCUs that white kids are going to those colleges right now. There are white kids that are going to those colleges right now, and they're playing sports at those colleges. But if it wasn't for whatever the insecurity of the white power structure, the stratified white power structure, we would not have to worry about this. It would all be included. There's white kids that still don't know Benjamin Banneker, the architect of the congressional building of the White House or D.C. was a black man.
Right.
The almanac was created by Benjamin Banneker. There's still white kids that are finding out now they don't know. I mean, there's friends I had that did not know he was black, and they're in their 60s.
Wow.
They're in their 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, it blew me away about this hospital. When I got here, my friend said, James, you know, a black man designed that hospital. I'm like, get out of here. And looking at it and the classic things that are added to it during that period of time, it's mind blowing. And it's sad and it's scary now when you got DeSantis and all these other people being able to scare the crap out of their constituents. We're going to shove black indoctrination. Well, you shoved it down my throat because I got sick and tired of George Washington in the 6th grade. I got sick and tired of hearing everything about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all these guys. And now when I go to college or when I go to the libraries, you read about things about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson that definitely aren't favorable, but show that they were part of the whole picture of taking advantage. I mean, macaroni and cheese, for instance. Macaroni and cheese that was created by the French, but Thomas Jefferson and George Washington sent their slaves to go to those gourmet schools abroad to learn how to be gourmet cooks. And I don't know I don't remember the law, but I know the slaves were ever to work off their bondage, and George Washington signed this thing into this law that a slave could work a certain amount of years, and then they would be granted their freedom. Well, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington moved the goalpost. They moved the goalpost where their chefs had to stay, and they were still in bondage because George Washington and those guys wanted these guys to cook for them and continue to cook for them.
Right.
And it was Sally Hemings. It was Sally Hemings' family members, her brothers, that were sent there. And George Washington was the major signer of this law. I wish I took notes. But when I'm looking at this, I'm like going, "Holy man, what other things are happening? You know, what other crooked deeds or whatever else that were done where folks, okay, well, we're going to do this now, and you can't do nothing about it. You can't do nothing about it. And they don't. Go ahead.
Jim, one of the things that, it was when I went up to set up the interview today with you, and you were talking about your experiences at working at Villa. If you could just give folks a little bit of your background, even though you're from Troy, New York. Great things come from Troy, New York, apparently. But you were But one of the things that struck me was the conversation you were having with one of your former workmates, who you look as a colleague and somebody that was really instrumental for you, was about how we approach the issues of people who are struggling with violence and kids that are struggling with violence, and how that affects our community, and what you learned.
Child care, and for me, I started back home, like I said, when they started breaking down the institutions down in New York, and they started wanting to mainstream people with barriers and difficulties into the public back in the early 70s. I wound up having a job, or getting a job by luck, because I knew a guy that worked at a day camp for the other kids at a summer day camp. But he worked at this group home setting where you had so many people with so many varieties of barriers, from cerebral palsy to intellectual limitations. And we were the first in Troy. It was my first experience, because I didn't even go to any college. But my first experience learning from people that had some college under their belt, but finding out that this is going to be something that's going to be considered for our future, to mainstream other human beings back into one, not just the living force, but into the workforce, which now we see. I mean, as I came to Rochester, you got programs like the ARC that had people with those that started employing people, and folks were working for bakeries and stuff like that. Well, what happened with me when I moved here to Rochester, college was my vehicle for independence, but I wasn't a serious student. Granted, I got a little bit of college under my belt, and it helped me. That's why I went to my first Black studies class when I went to MCC, and it was just all those Black students, and the white students didn't give a damn about that during the 80s. But here I am, getting a little bit of college in, getting a little bit of psychology and sociology classes, and my experience from working back home at Vanderheiden Hall helped me get hired into St. Joseph Villa, where the history of St. Joseph Villa was run by the nuns, and it was an orphanage. Kathy, who was instrumental with being a mentor and explaining to me the intricate aspect of what we were doing and how we were dealing with these kids psychologically that were coming from damaged households, or households no households at all, helped me understand. And then, like I said to Chris, I told Chris, yeah, a few Freudian, some young classes, some adolescent and child psychology classes that I was able to take, helped me along with Kathy in the training that we received, to be able to deal with these kids and to deal with factors like the trust factor, and deal with factors like them looking within themselves to be able to think, to start them on the road of thinking critical about themselves and how much they mattered and how much they deserve respect. And granted, where they're going back into households that were still damaged, but I got a chance to see where kids would rather stay on campus than go back home because of whatever they had to deal with at home. And thank God for Kathy showing me and explaining to me were delayed, and understanding the delayed process. They are still babies, even though they're 12 or 9 years old, and their vocabulary is adult and grotesque. But it's testing you, because one of the things that they were working was the trust factor with adults, because those trust factors have been destroyed.
Hey, Jimmy,
kids have been right.
What do you think the best way for us to outreach to kids and get them to learn about this stuff and get them into the community?
Well, when you have, I work with some of the brothers from Pathways of Peace back in the early 2000s. I got a chance, and I knew about that program. It was guys coming out of that were in gangs, that were incarcerated, that were going back into the community to work with the gangs. As much as that is a noble thing, the problem was us being Americans, not being producers. Those guys are trying to get these guys to relate with each other. But what I think kids needed, because when you get caught up into the drug game, they wanted money. And granted, they're being bombarded with all the flash and the flare of TV commercials or images or whatever from MTV and how I have to have this and have that. The thing is, if they were able to, those guys getting out of those programs are able to teach these kids or show these kids or lead them into the areas of becoming contractors. Because right now that's being talked about. Kids learning a craft.
Right. Yep. Something
and
tangible.
Yes. Something where, because a lot of these young men don't want to be on that street. Never did in the 90s. They didn't want to be out there. And a lot of them did it for survival because they got into the gang because they lived in certain neighborhoods. And the mere fact to hear young men say, I don't want these guys or my peers to know that I'm smart, because they were getting jumped and beaten up because they were intelligent, or being attacked because those insecure kids that were attacking them, they didn't know what possibilities that they had within themselves too, because, you're being told this in your household, you don't matter and you ain't nothing and you ain't this or whatever else. And, they can't see what they were doing, but they knew what they were doing.
You got somebody asking questions in the background. Oh.
I do not know anything about the Fireside Lounge because I got lost in other areas.
We love a group effort. Jimmy, so part of this, we're talking about what you originally came to Rochester and the programs that you worked on, but these are still the same challenges, and it seems like repetitive, repeating, chewing at the same wound over and over again, between gangs and as well as, anything that is disruptive, but at the same point in time, I grew up in the 70s, and when I worked in a restaurant, it was owned by a former FBI agent, and African-American kids were not allowed to be interviewed or work for the restaurant. It wasn't until 1981, okay? And I just remind people that, we have centuries and decades of this systemic poverty, that it just doesn't take one job program or one very kind, good person to come by and it makes a difference, but these programs to get, like prevailing wage, which is a big thing in Rochester, New York, where there are contracts that are given out for people that can do contract work, and they're supposed to be women and minority-owned businesses that are supposed to get a leg up on it. And we find out that they're not. And then we find out that there's all these onerous conditions in order to get these contracts. Okay? And that would be about putting...
I was fortunate enough to work with, I don't know if you guys know about the Monticellis that are on the south side. They're big. Their name is... folks know them on the Wedge. Pete Monticelli. He got a grant, and when we're talking about some of the ills of the modern day need, he, back in the 80s, got a grant through, I think it was the Urban League or through Need, and I don't know if it was a grant through the Urban League that went to Need, and it was to hire young adults in the neighborhoods and to do some of the construction or the rehab work on houses. I was one of those youth that, because after I got laid off through Stanmore Liquor, my friend who worked with Need told me about this program. So what you're talking about now, that's still needed. Those things, that's what helped me out. Before I went and I really went into the villa, I started learning about Rochester and areas when I started working. Are you guys going to have a party up here? This is the Flat Side Lounge, isn't it? Well, I got to get out of y'all party, but I'm sorry. We partied yesterday. My birthday was yesterday, so. Well, thank you. Well, this is some great spontaneous stuff right now, but I was one of the black kids on Bowman Street that went through this program where I learned how to put together how to grout tubs and stuff like that, and how to work with drywalls, and those things are definitely needed. Also, landscaping, and it's a shame that you hear all these, because a lot of these private contractors, they are pretty racist. They are pretty. They some of them take the chance, but they're still dealing with those barriers right now with these kids. And I've gotten in debates and arguments with people before, and they talked about, they need to get them off the corner. Well, you have a contracting job. You can teach these guys. You can be part of this, where these kids can produce, and they can find out, I can mow lawns. I can do these things. I'll learn the business, because I was one of those kids that was fortunate in the 80s. That was fortunate to be a part of that. But this stratified situation where you have all these, and a lot of them are Italian ran construction companies or whatever else. They would only hire maybe a couple.
Right.
And if there would be a couple, there'd be only a couple, not thinking that, they can, if you're going to go in these neighborhoods and you're going to do stuff with these houses and get these grants, you should be taking up the mantle and showing these kids there's other alternatives, and that you have these talents. You can tap in these talents where you can hammer in the nail.
One of the things that you talked about earlier today with me was, and this goes to the issue of energy, and I'm going back to when kids were acting out, when you put them in a timeout, and while they're in the timeout, they would continue, be mouthing off. And then people look at you, well, Jimmy, why aren't you punishing them even more? And this actually relates to the concept of when people, Rochester has been a big timeout for a long time for the African-American community and Latino community, and for the youth. It's such the longest timeout. One of the things you said, that if somebody is acting out, they're telling you something, they're communicating something, and you don't want to hear it. And so instead, what we've done is we've come back at them with even more punitive measures. And you talked about with me at the villa, or that some people said, well, you should really even punish them even more, which gets into that whole policing of how people are going to behave and what are the expectations out of them. So does that make sense? What I'm saying is, your approach when you said, well, yeah, you know what, they're in a timeout. They can still, verbalize their frustration, because you were letting them blow off steam. How do we get past the blowing off steam?
The blowing off steam is the processing after you're dealing with the situation. What's going on, folks? All right, my man. You got that Chiefs uniform? Hey, I'm sorry, Chris, but there's some beautiful people up here right now.
Hey, Jimmy, sounds like you're getting busy up there, because we know the Super Bowl's on tonight. But why don't we cut it and you go enjoy the game,
I didn't know they were going to have a private party again here.
People like the Super Bowl.
I was a New York Giants fan back in the day.
Oh, cool.
Oh, see now, we take it. I'm trying to get personal up here with stuff.
All right. But Jimmy, we're going to let you go. Okay.
Folks.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, let me go, Chris.
All right.
Thank you, folks.
Love you.
I can't wait to see you guys soon.
Happy birthday.
Right.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Thank you, everybody.
Happy birthday, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So I just want to again thank Jimmy Benbow for coming in. We wish you well. He's on the path to recovery. And it's always good to hear back from him. It's been a while. But thank you for coming in for Black History Month.
Thank you.
Talking about all that stuff. Just always great to have you on the show. So I actually have some music. We're going to go back into a little Blood Orange Rainbow Rock.
Once again, that was James Benbow and the crew of Rainbow Rock Show on WAYO-LP Rochester. You can learn more about Rainbow Rock Show on wayofm.org or go to Facebook at Rainbow Rock. Drop the K, it's Rainbow ROC on Facebook. And you can follow us on Twitter at Rainbow_Rock. I'm Christopher Hennelly, and thank you so much for listening in to this special episode with James Benbow.